Here to discuss the 2014 legislative session on behalf of his caucus, we have Senate Minority Leader David Hand. Thanks for joining us, Senator.
Good to be with you.
We're going to go through several of the key issues that are expected to be taken up this session. Let's begin with minimum wage. Sure. Two proposals currently in conference committee. What is your caucus strategy if and when a final package makes it to the Senate floor?
Well, one of my predictions this year is that we will see an increase in minimum wage. I know I'm going out on a limb to make that bold prediction, but we think that both the majorities in the House and the Senate passed last year an increase. They are not in agreement yet. On our side, in our caucus, we think that conforming to the federal minimum wage standard, which is a 40% increase from where we are right now, is probably prudent. It matches what Wisconsin, Iowa, the Dakotas have, so it would put us in the same place as our surrounding states. But we're very concerned about elevating that too high. It does have an economic impact. Recent federal report that was released establishes that there could be significant job loss if you push that minimum wage too high. I had a meeting just last week with the nursing home providers, nursing care providers, and they say that they cannot afford to have a huge minimum wage pushed onto them, and they will need to have additional financing from the state if that happens. And that makes sense because they're dependent on us for income. But the other businesses in the public that get forced into a high minimum wage, what do? They have to raise prices, they have to find the wages other places, cut benefits from existing employees, other things. It just needs to be cautiously done.
Okay, Senator, the Safe and Supportive Schools Act, also known as the anti-bullying bill. Senate Majority Leader Tom Bach was on the show and he stated he's looking for some bipartisan support if this is to move forward. Will he get any?
Well, yes, and I have talked with him about this, and we think that something of this size should be done in a bipartisan way. I think the current bill that is being offered on the floor doesn't have any support from not only Republicans, but the School Board Association opposes it 100%. I've talked to dozens of school districts around the state. None of them like the bill that's on the floor. They don't believe they need it. And I think we need to have a bill that reflects the realities that school districts have elected representatives that work with their public and with the students, and we should trust them a little more than what this bill apparently does. And I think there's a good compromise that we can reach.
Sunday liquor sales. Senator Roger Reinert carrying the bill in the Senate. Jennifer Loon, the Deputy Minority Leader, carries the bill in the House. Her language essentially gives the power to local municipalities to decide whether or not to open up Sunday liquor sales. Does that language have any support with your caucus? Is it even a caucus position?
We have talked about it, not a lot in our caucus. There are some members that are in favor of a change in the law, others that are opposed to it. I don't think we're going to have a caucus position on something like that. We don't see that it's going to be a huge issue this year. It may come up, I'm not sure. And when it does, we'll see what the votes are, but it's not something that we're going to be pushing our members to go one way or the other on.
It's likely there could be a repeal of the business-to-business taxes. It is likely they'll be looked at regardless of whether or not they are repealed. But is there any tax reform your caucus would like to push? Anything that could realistically make it through?
Well, we think that should be a priority for the session, and we certainly support that. Going back to last year's special session, we think all three of those taxes should be repealed, and we think we can do that. We hope we have support from the majorities. But beyond that, we think there's federal conformity on deductions that we should look at. I've heard some other ideas that we should look at in our tax code. I don't know that we're in a position to do a full overhaul of our tax code, but we can do some things that would be helpful to the economy and serve the purpose of returning some of the excess money we've collected in the surplus back to taxpayers who paid it, and this is one way to do it.
The bonding bill, again, going back to our interview with Senator Bach, he says there is a handshake agreement to try to keep that bonding bill to $1 billion over the course of 2 years as opposed to $1 billion moving into 2014. What if there's a push by the governor to move this number up? Is that something you'd consider?
Well, no, I don't think so, unless there were significant offers by the governor to help do some things that maybe the Republicans want to do. But the reality is, to do a bonding bill, you need bipartisan support, as it should be. We're putting the state into debt, and so you need to have a higher threshold of votes. And we did have an agreement last year to keep the total bonding over the course of the biennium to be $1 billion. We did some things for capital restoration last year, and so I think that does put an effective limit on how big the bonding bill can be this year. We'd like to see the priorities be infrastructure, transportation, things of that sort, and so there's going to be some negotiation on that. But at the end of the day, we do support the bonding bill to that level, and we hope that the governor will come around to our side.
Would you support surplus cash being used for any building projects?
Well, I think at this point we think that the surpluses, so-called, should be returned to taxpayers. We don't need them. We've collected them in excess of what our needs are, And because we have these tax issues that are out there, we ought to use that excess money to make sure we can return that in a tax change.
Senator Minshore, still an issue with your caucus in particular, and so do you expect to get any hearings on any particular proposals to try to change or reestablish Minshore?
Well, we are going to try. We think there are some things that we could do and should do to improve the current governing process, for example. The board needs, I think, stronger governance by the legislature. I think we need to do some things on what powers they may have. We don't think they ought to be allowed to do active purchasing, so-called. That just limits more choices for consumers. We think this rollout has been nothing short of a disaster, and we think that we ought to be much more cautious about going forward. You see the federal government just sort of unilaterally deciding not to implement portions of this law. I think we should be more cautious in Minnesota about what works for Minnesotans, and I don't think that the current structure is working. So there are going to be some things that we will offer. We don't know whether or not they'll get a hearing, but we're going to try.
Senator, as session begins, it's only days away, how would you categorize or classify the tone of your caucus moving forward?
Well, we're optimistic. We think that the public has been hearing a lot of things from the Democrats and observing what they have done on the other side, and we think that from our perspective, I think the public is kind of scratching their heads. Why did we raise the taxes so much? Why did we do the spending so much? Why are we pursuing these things like daycare unionization? Why did we do this Minshore thing that's turned out to be such a debacle? So from our side, we think it helps us make the argument that there is a better, more prudent way to govern, and we look forward to having a House majority of Republicans next election.
Okay, Senator David Hann, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Yep.